What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. So last night's Newsnight was talking about the possibility the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, and Remainer Dominic Grieve are planning to prevent Boris Johnson proroguing Parliament to get no deal through. The BBC host Emily Maitlis cannot help showing her clear bias when the Tory MP refuses to handicap the next Prime Minister by voting for the Grieve amendment that is likely to be put through Parliament today in an attempt to block a no-deal Brexit. Let's check it out.
Hello, good evening. Tonight we start with breaking news of a rebellion afoot in the Palace of Westminster. At the centre is the question of whether our parliamentarians are able to prevent the suspension of Parliament to stop the new Prime Minister pushing a no-deal through. But the route, as we know by now, is never simple. Much will hinge upon what kind of amendments the Speaker, John Bercow, will allow to be tabled tomorrow morning. And, perhaps an even bigger question, what ministers who want to stop no deal are prepared to do to make sure they have the numbers to win. Highly complicated stuff, and it's all being worked out as we come on air. Our political editor, Nick Watt, can perhaps explain for us. What are you hearing tonight, Nick? What's going on?
Tonight I've learned that there are big discussions amongst big ministers about whether they should resign tomorrow. And why is that? It would be to support a possible vote in Parliament that would effectively block the next Prime Minister from suspending Parliament. Now, that may happen because there may be a U-turn in Parliament, and the former Attorney General, Dominic Grieve, may be able to table an amendment that would prevent the suspension of Parliament, known as the prorogation of Parliament. He was hoping to do this last week, wasn't allowed, and this is what he said. We can see what he said about what his amendment would do. He said prorogation could not take place because when these statements and motions should be made and passed, that's all about how the talks are going in Northern Ireland to restore the executive there. He said the House would have to be sitting. Now, it's important to say no final decisions have been made. The ministers have not yet decided to resign. For example, they are pleading with the Prime Minister overnight to allow a free vote. As I understand it, she's minded not to do that because she believes that that would be seen as a pretty hostile act to her successor. It's not inevitable that the Speaker will call the Grieve Amendment. As I understand it, the Speaker's clerks are very, very unhappy about this because they're saying that the Grieve Amendment goes beyond the scope of this bill.
Why, though, have we had this U-turn? Because the Lords had a vote that was moving towards Grieve, but what was going on? Two
big things have happened today. The House of Lords voted for an amendment by Lord Anderson, the former anti-terrorism reviewer, a vote that moved the legislation very, very strongly in the direction of the Grieve Amendment. And the argument for the Speaker is that now means that the Grieve Amendment is therefore within the scope of this bill. The other crucial thing is that last week it was Eleanor Lang, one of the deputy speakers who was in the chair because it was just a meeting of the committee of the whole House. She decided not to call the Grieve Amendment. Tomorrow it's the Speaker in the chair because the technical process is the House of Commons considering amendments from the House of Lords.
You've been walking the corridors, talking, listening. What kind of conversations did you have?
Well, it's pretty high-octane conversations behind the scenes. I spoke to one former minister who's meeting two of the cabinet ministers who may resign, and this former minister is saying to them, I am not going to support anything that has the name Dominic Grieve attached to it unless you lot resign. I have had enough of putting my neck on the line. I understand that there was a meeting yesterday where four ministers did say that they were minded to resign if the Dominic Grieve amendment came through, because they believe that really could have an impact. I was talking to one former minister who said that the idea of suspending Parliament is absolutely crazy. Why would the next Prime Minister do it? This former minister talked about how the police would have to be brought in to drag Labour MPs out of the Commons chamber because they would stage a sit-in, and how there would be demonstrations outside the House of Commons. I spoke to one member of the government, senior member of the government, who believes that the Speaker will call this amendment. And this person said, I believe that the pro-Europeans on the Conservative side won't succeed. They are divided. And this person said, a marathon race is underway. The Brexiteers are 18 miles down the course and the pro-Europeans have only just started.
So we heard from the BBC's political editor Nick Watt talking about the Remoaning MP's plan to block Boris Johnson from proroguing Parliament. I'm not sure how that's even possible, considering the Queen could shut it down regardless of what the MPs say. The plan is for Dominic Grieve to table an amendment that would require Parliament to remain open for business in Northern Ireland. So an underhand tactic to frustrate the Brexit process yet again, after it failed last week in this attempt to get this amendment discussed in Parliament. There are MPs threatening to resign from the cabinet, according to the BBC, so they can vote against the government, as Theresa May won't give a free vote for these traitors to get their own way. It's only been given any credence because the unelected Lords have voted on an amendment similar to this one. How is this democratic then? Why are the BBC not pointing out these unelected fuckpigs should not have any say on the Brexit process? It would seem this amendment rests on the biased, Ramoning fuckpig that is John Bercow, as last week it was his deputy who rejected it, meaning it will likely be voted on today.
Nick, thanks very much. Well, joining us now, George Freeman, who is chair of the PM's Policy Board, and the former Arts Minister, Ed Vaizey. You two were in a pretty similar place, weren't you, back in end of March? Where are you now? Will you, George, support the Grieve Amendment, as you would have done in March?
No. Look, I think we're witnessing... It's a brilliant report from Nick on the sort of shenanigans of end-of-term parliamentary, pass the parcel. People are preparing for the new Prime Minister. My view is...
That sounds very flippant, if you don't mind me saying.
No, I don't mean it flippantly.
It's about what happens
I think that the truth
Parliament.
is a new Prime Minister will appear next week, and I think that new Prime Minister needs a chance at a fresh start, needs a chance to negotiate with Europe, and I want to give them a chance, whoever it is, whether it's Jeremy or Boris next week, a chance to go to Europe with a very clear message that, like it or not, the House of Commons has heard the message, realises we're in a very, very tough corner, and it understands completely that we have to leave the European Union.
Ed,
so tomorrow I'll be rearming the new Prime Minister's armoury for that negotiation.
Well, I abstained last week on Dominic Grieve's amendment, slightly echoing what the former minister who spoke to Nick Watt, I suspect I know who it is feeling, that there have been a lot of rebellions while members of the cabinet who agree with a lot of the backbench MPs who are fighting to stop no deal are still sitting in cabinet. And so it feels at the moment that, people want them to stand up and be counted, which is why, to a certain extent, if the Brexiteers are saying the pro-Europeans or the anti-no dealers are slightly split, there's an element of truth in that. I think things will change when Boris becomes Prime Minister, because he will sack half the cabinet, so they'll be forced to come out and say what they believe in. To a certain extent, the amendment tomorrow, which will come back from the Lords, and I think, by the way, the idea that Dominic is going to amend this amendment is a bit of a sideshow. There will be an amendment from the Lords, which is in effect a signal that Parliament will not allow itself to be prorogued, is still a bit of a sideshow. I don't believe that Boris Johnson will try and prorogue Parliament, again, for all the reasons that Nick said.
Just tell us what you're doing, though. Are you going to vote with the amendment tomorrow if Dominic Grieve...
I will probably vote with the amendment tomorrow, yeah.
You will be supporting Dominic Grieve?
Or the Lords Amendment, which I think is actually the amendment that will be voted on.
And do you think that ministers will be with you?
I don't think ministers will resign tomorrow. I think they will simply say, we'll wait to be sacked, and when Boris becomes Prime Minister, and then the game, to a certain extent, moves to the next stage. When
you don't think anyone will resign?
I don't think anyone's going to resign tomorrow.
Do you think Theresa May should give a free vote? Do you think she will?
I don't think it's in the Prime Minister's nature to give a free vote on this kind of thing. I don't think it's something that she would, she regards it as her job to get government business through the Commons.
Do you see where George Freeman's coming from, which is, why would you do anything that binds a new Prime Minister's hand? We don't know what he's going to do, and you should give him a free rein. I
think George has a point, but I think that, first of all, I think prorogation is unthinkable. I don't think Boris will do it, but I do think it is still worthwhile sending a signal that there are enough votes there to stop a prorogation. And after all, it wasn't, as it were, the anti-no dealers who started this argument that somehow
you would have thought it was
this
unthinkable once.
Situation.
You would have been in that camp. You would have been unable to look yourself in the mirror at the idea that the democracy of the United Kingdom could just be put on hold to allow one person's
Of course, and I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think either of Jeremy or Boris.
So why don't you stand up and be counted then?
Because that's not what tomorrow's about. Tomorrow is a perfectly excusable and perfectly normal parliamentary procedure.
It's the last time. You've heard that. It's the last time.
No, I just think we've got a new Prime Minister starting next week, a new start, a new negotiation. We shouldn't seek to bind the will of a future Parliament. In October, Parliament will meet. I will be in it, Ed will be in it, and Parliament will decide then, and should decide then, what the right thing is. Trying to bind its hands now is a mistake.
One former minister told me tonight the line that keeps getting peddled out is now is not the time. This will be a now is not the time Brexit right through till the end of October, and no deal will happen. And you'll have to wonder why it has.
Yeah, look, we're in a terrible place. I'm not suggesting this is perfect at all. I think we're in, you know my view, we're in a terrible corner.
I don't think I do anymore, George, because I know what you would have done 2 months ago, and I now see that you're not doing what you said you would have done 2 months ago, and I'm wondering how long you're going to leave it if you feel the same as Ed Vaizey.
Well, let me explain why. There's all the difference in the world between March 27th, when a group of MPs are willfully voting down a withdrawal agreement because they actively want no deal. I was not prepared to go along with that. And a new Prime Minister seeking a mandate to negotiate on the terms on which Europe have set out, that if there's no deal, if there isn't a negotiated agreement, there's no deal.
You know where he is on that, because he said there's going to be no backstop and therefore there's going to be no Theresa May deal.
But I don't want to send him out to bat with a broken bat for these negotiations next week. He needs to go to Europe and say, you've seen the mood in Parliament. No deal is a very real possibility. Now negotiate.
Ed Vaizey, you're handing him the broken bat.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with George's argument that somehow the Prime Minister should have in their armoury the idea that they will suspend Parliament. I mean, we've gone down the rabbit hole.
It is quite a bat, that, isn't it?
No,
if the police are being pulled in to pull out Labour MPs who are sitting, on the floor in the Commons.
No, I was talking about no deal. The idea that either new Prime Minister...
It's the same thing. That's how you get there.
...will prorogue Parliament, I think, is for the birds. I think Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt would be laughed out of court for suspending Parliament, proroguing Parliament. I just don't think it's a real option at all. And if they did want to do
why don't you help them rule it out then? Really easy to help them rule it out. Could all be done tomorrow. And then you could...
Because it's part of the armoury of a Prime Minister in taking office next week.
Suspending democracy is part of the armoury of a Prime Minister.
They need to have the power they need. Parliament will judge at the time what it thinks is the right thing. We shouldn't seek to bind a future Parliament.
So it is. Now is not the time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
So the two MPs they've got on to discuss this both indicated before they would vote for the Grieve amendment, meaning the BBC wanted two Tory MPs who would vote for the bill in an attempt to limit Boris Johnson's ability to get us out of Europe by any means necessary, showing the BBC's clear bias. You can actually see Emily's shock and outrage when the Tory MP George Freeman states that he would not vote for this traitorous Grieve bill because he does not want to tie the hands of the next Prime Minister. Of course, neither of these MPs are Brexiteers. They're both Remoaners being forced to go for the softest Brexit they can get. Ed Vaizey intends to vote for this Grieve bill to prevent prorogation of Parliament because he wants to remain in the EU, I'm sure. These traitors are the reason Brexit has been delayed because they back scumbags like Grieve who are trying their best to fuck Brexit up. They should join the Lib Dems if they hate Brexit and democracy so much. You can see Emily is desperate for the Tory ministers to resign because she needs it to happen to prevent no deal and by extension Brexit itself. Because if Boris can't force through no deal, we are looking at another extension to Brexit which will bolster the Remain campaign and force Boris Johnson to call an election with a manifesto going for a no deal Brexit, which will be the same as the Brexit Party's manifesto, and the other two major Remoaning parties will fight it out for the Remain vote. I'm sure the Tories don't want that, but I think it's becoming more and more likely with each passing day. She questions George in utter outrage that he won't stop the prorogation of Parliament, saying how can you let democracy be put on hold? Well, Emily, you commie spunk trumpet, democracy has been on hold ever since the British people voted in a democratic referendum 3 years ago that has still not been delivered and is constantly attacked and delayed by the Remoaning fuckpigs in Parliament and the media. At the end of the clip, Emily can't hide her bias when George refuses to do what the Remoaning shitweasel wants him to do. Great bit of impartiality there, Emily. We can see you hold no ill feelings towards anyone who won't follow your anti-democratic narrative to block Brexit. Well, I'm going to end it there. The Bias Broadcasting Corporation gets two MPs it expects to be against no deal and ready to vote to block the next Prime Minister from suspending Parliament to make it happen. Turns out one of them's not ready to do that. This woman would not know impartiality if it cock-slapped her in the face. Where was the pro-Brexit, pro-no-deal panellist then? While George would not vote to tie Boris Johnson's hands, right now he clearly would at some point, as Emily was under the impression he was going to vote for the Grieve bill today. Newsnight is just the Remain propaganda show of the BBC and literally don't care if we know about it. Now let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe and share this video as it helps the channel a lot, and I will see you all in the next one.